I'm going to be reading again from my book, Mind in Evolution as Assessed Through Reviews of Major Texts. Social Environment and Moral Progress by Alfred Wallace, 1913. Alfred Wallace was co-proposer, along with Charles Darwin, of natural selection being the primary mechanism driving evolution. In fact, Wallace submitted the idea for publication first, but graciously shared the credit with Darwin and referred to the mechanism throughout his life as Darwin's discovery. His studies began with collecting fossils and specimens of exotic living creatures in South America and Indonesia, among whose people, far beyond the reach of Western civilization, he lived for many years. Wallace was notable for the mildness of character combined with a fierce insistence on human dignity. Over a century ago, he foresaw opportunities open to us to apply what we know about evolution to today's problems. He foresaw current interest in the idea of states providing every citizen with a basic income. Quote, "I have shown that the well-established laws of evolution, as they really apply to mankind, are all favorable to the advance of true civilization and morality. Our existing competitive and antagonistic social system alone neutralizes their beneficent operation. That system must therefore be radically changed into one of brotherly cooperation and coordination for the equal good of all." He was strongly opposed to the supposedly evolution-based claims of the eugenicists. He supplies quotes from a couple of them as follows: "If it be true that reason must direct the course of human evolution, and if it also be true that selection of the fittest is the only method available for that purpose, then, if we are to have any race improvement at all, the dreadful law of destruction of the weak and helpless must, with Spartan firmness, be carried out voluntarily and deliberately." Here's another. "The immediate effect upon character of the compensation to workmen for accidents is to save the careless, thoughtless, and incompetent from the results of their faults. This at once reduces largely the weeding and educational effect of the bad qualities." Wallace was profoundly opposed to eugenics. He was implacably opposed to committees assuming selection's role of deciding whose progeny would be most fit. Quote, "I trust that all my readers will oppose any legislation on this subject by a chance body of elected persons who are totally unfitted to deal with far less complex problems than this one, and as to which they are sure to bungle disastrously." Social Environment and Moral Progress was the last book Wallace wrote. From it we can learn what evolution meant to one of its most thoughtful students. The meanings he found in it contrast nicely with the conservative meanings given to it by Herbert Spencer, Social Darwinism. Wallace was adamant that natural selection was the mechanism of evolution of all creatures except, that is, of humans. Quote, "The theory of natural selection as expounded by Darwin was so completely successful in explaining the origin of the almost infinitely varied forms of the organic world that it was naturally supposed to be equally applicable to mankind. But so soon as man appeared upon the earth, even in the earliest periods at which we have any proofs of his existence, or in the lowest state of barbarism in which we are now able to study him, we find him able to use and act upon the forces of nature and to modify his environment, both inorganic and organic, in ways which formed a completely new departure in the entire organic world. He means through mind. If we recognize the brain as the organ of the mind and give due weight to the complete distinctness and enormous superiority of the mind of man as compared with that of all other animals, we may realize the enormous effect his mind has produced in modifying and almost neutralizing the action of that great law of natural selection which has held supreme sway in every other portion of the organic world. Continued. The less fit are therefore not eliminated as among all other creatures, and we behold for the first time in the history of the world the great law of natural selection by the survival only of the fittest, to some extent neutralized. Continued. But this is only the first and least important of the effects produced by the superior faculties of man. In the whole animal world, as we have seen, every species is preserved in harmony with the slowly changing environment by modifications of its own organs or faculties. In the case of man, however, such bodily adaptations were unnecessary because his greatly superior mind enabled him to meet all such difficulties in a new and different way. As soon as his specially human faculties were developed, and we have as yet no knowledge of him in any earlier condition, he would cease to be influenced by natural selection in his physical form and structure. Looked as a mere animal, he would appear almost stationary, the changes in the surrounding universe ceasing to produce in him that powerful modifying effect which they exercise over all other members of the entire organic world. We see then that with the advent of man, they had come into existence, a being in whom that subtle force we term mind becomes of far more importance than mere bodily structure, though less capable than most other animals of living on the herbs and fruits that unaided nature supplies. This wonderful faculty, mind, taught him to govern and direct nature to his own benefit, and compelled her to produce food for him almost where and when he pleased. From the moment when the first skin was used as a covering, when the first rude spear was formed to assist him in the chase, when fire was first used to cook his food, when the first seed was sown or shoot planted, a grand revolution was effected in nature, a revolution which in all previous ages of the earth's history had had no parallel. A being had arisen who was no longer subject to bodily change with changes of the physical universe, a being who was in some degree superior to nature inasmuch as he knew how to control and regulate her action, and could keep himself in harmony with her, not through any changes in his body, but by means of his vast superiority of mind. And here, from someone with almost unparalleled field experience of humans living beyond the reach of Western urban society, quote, affection, sympathy, compassion form as essential a part of human nature as do the higher intellectual and moral faculties. In the very earliest periods of history and among the very lowest of existing savages, they are fully manifested, not merely between the members of the same family, but throughout the whole tribe, and also in most cases to every stranger who is not a known or imagined enemy. For Wallace, Humans seem to have sprung miraculously into existence with all their mental powers fully formed. Quote, the conclusion reached in the earlier part of this volume, that the higher intellectual and moral nature of man has been approximately stationary during the whole period of human history, and that the cause of the phenomenon has been the absence of any selective agency adequate to increase it, renders it necessary to give some further explanation as to the probable or possible origin of this higher nature, and also of that admirable human body, which also appears to have reached a condition of permanent stability. What explanation for human evolution does Wallace come up with? Not a Lamarckian inheriting of acquired characteristics. He argues against that at length. In its place, he upholds an old-fashioned deism. To myself, there seems only one explanation of the very remarkable and almost incredible results just stated. It is that the divine nature in us, that portion of our higher nature which raises us above the brutes, and the influx of which makes us men, cannot be lost, cannot even be permanently deteriorated by conditions however adverse, by training however senseless and bad. It ever remains in us, the central and essential portion of our human nature, ready to correspond to every favorable opportunity that arises, to grasp and hold firm every fragment of high thought or noble action that has been brought to its notice, to oppose, even to the death, every falsehood in teaching, every tyranny in action. What I have here termed the divine influx, which at some definite epoch in his evolution at once raised man above the rest of the animals, creating, as it were, a new being with a continuous spiritual existence in a world or worlds where eternal progress was possible for him. To prepare him for this progress with ever-increasing diversity, faculties of enormous range were required, and these needed development in every direction which earthly conditions rendered possible. In order that this extreme diversity of character should be brought about, a great space of time, as measured by successive generations, was necessary, though utterly insignificant as compared with the preceding duration of organic life on the earth, and still more insignificant as compared with the spirit life to succeed it. I admire Wallace, though he insisted natural selection could account for all other living creatures. He reasoned that it could not account for all aspects of human evolution. In his other writings, he points out the talents that appeared full-blown with the advent of civilization, such as logic and mathematics, even singing, even if they had originally been generated by natural selection, would have been lost through disuse by the time civilization arose. In other words, they had some other source. For what was special about humans, he invoked the term divine, but he was no creationist, no closet Christian as we think of that today. Instead, applying rationality to the search for this agent, he began frequenting spiritualist sessions. For this he was roundly mocked, but he persisted, perhaps seeing no more likely source of enlightenment in the London of his time. I applaud that judgment and that persistence, even if in retrospect it seems misguided. He never abandoned his insistence that any theory of evolution remained incomplete unless it could account for human mental capabilities.